treat this morning. I'd like to introduce Dr. Philip Tran, who is a Jacksonville native. He is a hospitalist. That means that if you're in a hospital, usually there's a doctor and a team of people that take care of you in addition to all the specialists, but he would be coordinating that. Dr. Tran has started this organization called Change. He'll talk to you about it. He's focused on prevention. And this will just be a little snippet of what that might be like. So please help me in welcoming Dr. Tran.
Thank you. Good morning, Eagles.
Good morning.
It's the beginning of the year. You guys had a good summer off? Good time to recuperate? Ready to start back at the grind? Hopefully. I understand this is the upper school, right? 9th through 12th grade, correct? How many of you guys are 12th graders about to get ready to set off to college? Good. How many of you guys are 9th graders just starting off high school? Fantastic. Was anyone in the life management class over the summer where I gave that Omni talk? Good, that front row there. All right. So as you said, my name is Dr. Tran, and I'm a hospitalist. And today I'm going to be talking to you guys about a topic that I'm extremely passionate about, so much so that about 2 years ago, I decided to sacrifice half my income to go part-time in order to address this. And finally, this is the first time I'm going to get paid, all right? But a few weeks ago, I came down with a viral infection, and I always get this cough, this lingering cough that really itches here. Sometimes when I'm talking, I might go into a coughing fit. And I'm hoping, and I hope you guys will pray for me if you pray, that I can make it through this talk. Otherwise, I have to refund this money. I really don't want to have to do that, okay? But it's this topic of such extreme importance because it really focuses on who you are, right? When we're talking about self-care, you have to understand that there's many definitions of it. And this is such a broad topic that I'm being asked here today to compile decades of knowledge that I've developed and all these philosophies that I had into 30 minutes. And we are starting late. And I already pushed that 30 minutes. So I'm going to be kind of skipping over some things here in order to kind of hit the meat of the topic. But when we're talking about self-care, the first thing you have to recognize is that everyone has a kind of a different definition of what they consider self-care. All right? And we're going to talk about that because I want you guys to think of it as a unified definition. Now, you might think about self-care as grooming yourself, shaving, doing your hair, brushing your teeth, right? That gigantic back shaver is actually something that does exist. It's available on Amazon. I don't have to use it because I don't have that problem, right? You might think about self-care as getting yourself ready for the day, putting on that cologne, that perfume, doing your makeup. And some people might take it to an extreme, thinking about self-care in an almost selfish perspective, where all they're thinking about is elevating themselves, sometimes at the cost of another. Now, to date myself, I used to have Mean Girls up here. I don't even know if anyone knows what that movie is. Mean Girls? Okay. I'm not that old. But #Reality High is something that's on Netflix. It's available now, and it really kind of addresses a lot of these issues about promoting yourself sometimes at the cost of another. As a physician, though, when I talk about self-care, traditionally we're taught to think about the body in a stance of organ systems. Your muscles, your bones, your lungs, your heart, your gut, your skin, and your brain. But long ago, even way before I was a doctor, I was always very fascinated by the brain and human behavior. It was always an extreme interest of mine. And that's not changed to this day.
At this time, all advisors and students should be in session 2.
I always recognize that the brain is your general. And 3 things that I tell my patients is this: if you don't have good mental health, then you're a lot less likely to do the right things for your body, for your overall health. And if you don't have good mental health, if you go to see your doctor and they're giving you recommendations, you're a lot less likely to follow those recommendations. And we now know through a lot of research that certain hormones, not just the brain chemicals, but things like adrenaline and cortisol, your stress hormone, can cause damage to the body over time if you're under constant states of stress. All right? So in essence, I say mind over matter. Okay? We focus so much on the physical health side of things, don't we? But we oftentimes forget about our brains. And we don't learn about the things that we know. Psychology, neuroscience has been an evolving field for the last few decades, and yet there's no standard way that we teach it in schools. I've been spending the last year traveling around the city talking to different principals, and it's a big problem in public school systems. In private schools, you guys are doing things like this, which is amazing to me, because everything you guys are talking about today, the activities you're doing, are actually a part of the boxes that I've talked about. And they were doing this independent before I even came into the picture. Okay? So mind over matter. So I mentioned those 2 terms, mental health. Anyone here, just raise your hands when I said mental health. Did you think about mental health in a bad way? Did you think about something bad when you heard that term? Raise your hands if you thought about something bad, negative. Okay, good. How many of you guys thought about nothing when I said that? Raise your hands. Okay, we got a little bit of work to do, but what I wanted to bring up here is that when we're talking about mental health, I wanted to define a couple of things for you. Because mental health, just like your physical health and conditioning, is neither good or bad at the start, okay? You have to start somewhere where you have to develop it over time. And mental health, just like the body, is really kind of a culmination of bringing together of things, what work you put into it, okay? It's an interaction of your genes, what you get from your mother and your father, your environment that you grow up in, and all the life choices that you can make based on the perspectives that you have, the beliefs that you have, and the knowledge that you know. And one of the reasons I'm here today is to try to bring you some knowledge that we probably don't standardly teach to children when it really matters most, because much of your development of the most important part of your brain, which is the frontal lobe, happens during this time. And it's not fully developed until you're about 20 to 25 years old. So think about that. If you don't know what to do for your mind, we can set ourselves up for failure. So when we're talking about negativity in regards to mental health, a lot of it's driven, not only evolutionarily are we thinking about negative things because you're trying to protect yourself from it, but the media, right? Think about what just happened. The tragedy that just happened at the landing over the weekend and all the tragedies that have occurred throughout the United States in the last year and a half. We always hear about the mental health or mental state of the people that perpetrate these issues. I mean, you can think about the things like the gun debate, which I'm not going to touch on, but behind those things is still the brain, regardless of what you think. And it doesn't mean that mental illness is driving these things, but when you think about mental health, separate from mental illness, you need to think about mental health as conditioning. And when you're not having a conditioned mind, you're more likely to be impulsive, have poor judgment, have anger problems, and irritability. I mean, have you guys ever had a period of that after like a period of sleep deprivation? You're studying for a test, you're staying up, sleeping like 2 hours a night for like a week straight. Are you yourself after that time? Are you like a Snickers commercial, where you're angry until you get that Snickers bar? Raise your hand if you've ever experienced that, right? We all do, but some people experience it more, and that's the importance of what we're talking about here today. I oftentimes talk about that quote that you might have heard before, the grass is always greener on the other side. What they're really trying to get people to realize is that, everyone is suffering. We're not all unique in that regard. So be satisfied with where you're at. But what I want to tell you, a little permutation on this, is that if you have a support system and environment that is actually destructive on the things that you need, then there's absolutely going to be greener grass. You just have to find it. And it might be harder to find nowadays, okay? But it also boils down to that whole optimism and pessimism spectrum. Are you looking at the world glass half full or glass half empty, right? Are you on the left side where you're looking at mental health as anguish and suffering or recovery? Or looking at self-destruction or foundational building and growth? Or that regression where you're shrinking or you're growing? Change, the organization I talk about, looks at the positive perspective of this, because I realize that no matter where you are at the spectrum, even if you're at the bottom, the only way you can go is up. And I like to think about that, but I acknowledge that problems exist. I don't avoid it. I've become an optimist over time. I used to be pretty pessimistic when I was in high school, all right? But I became optimistic because I realized that's a choice I could have to look at the world glass half full and to see what I can do to make the world a better place, okay? So when talking about mental health, we already mentioned this. I wanted to bring up a couple of other things. When I mentioned choice, I wanted to emphasize this, that I don't say that mental illness is based on choices that people make, okay? That's a big stigma that exists out there today. A lot of the things that we talk about when we're talking about choice is not really much of a choice at all. Because when you're talking about making the right choices, you have to have the predisposition to have a good mind at the time. But if your mind's unhealthy, again, you're impulsive and you lack a good rationality and judgment. And if you're young, you haven't fully developed the brains. You're literally not able to think like an adult, so why should we judge you based on that? There's 3 things I tell my patients that you truly have a choice in. It really applies to anything, not just mental illness, but when you want to make a next step in your life, you're trying to pursue a career. Think about these 3 choices. And by the way, you guys have that handout there. The handout has pretty much everything I'm talking about here today. Something for you to review at home. There's exercises that you can kind of review with friends or family members to try to explore the things I'm talking about today with them on your own time. But the 3 choices that you have is, number 1, to recognize and accept that you have a problem, you don't need to label it, or that there's somewhere that you want to grow, something that you want to do. Number 2, to think about and identify the barriers that would allow you to overcome the state you're in and excel. And number 3, to get the right help. Emphasis on the right help. What I've realized is that the vast majority of people out there want to help other people. We have good intentions in our hearts, and yet when we're talking to individuals, we never really know about the effects that we're truly having. What I oftentimes find is that we're unintentionally causing harm because people are kind of telling us back what we're telling them. They aren't letting us know that what we said didn't really help them. All right, so there's always going to be the right source of help. It's just because you have a problem and you don't get the right help initially, that doesn't mean you have to give up, okay? Keep banging on all the doors until the right one opens. That's the best message I can give you here today, because the right help is out there for you. It just depends on how you can get it. Nowadays, with the culture we have, there's issues here which I'm trying to change, but the vast majority of people, when they get help and they get help early, can improve. And I want you guys to realize that. Now, the fourth thing is, and I've kind of already mentioned this, mental health does not equal mental illness, right? If you've got someone who's an Olympian, has a really muscular body, they can still have health problems, right? They can still have asthma, they can still have diabetes, they can still have heart disease, especially if they're using steroids or something like that. You cannot judge a book by its cover. So the real question that you have to ask yourself today is that, is there a recipe for success and happiness in life? I was going to ask this question to have you guys answer that, but to save time, I realize for me, I tell people, yes, I do believe that there is a recipe. Okay, and when I look at the other side of the coin, I always think about the opposite side. For those individuals that do not believe that there's a recipe, it's typically two types of people. Number one, it's someone who's been extremely successful throughout life, and they didn't realize or accept just how much help they probably had. And they say, no, everything was me. I put all the work in, as if nothing else affected it. And then you have the individuals who've probably accomplished nothing in life, and they don't want to take accountability for it. They don't want to accept that, hey, I could have done something about this. But I realize, when I think about it from a kind of philosophy standpoint, is that there really is a recipe for success, because you have to think about it like making a dish. If you're making some sort of special dish, there's always a recipe, isn't there? And with every dish, there's also key ingredients that you have. Now, some people have different ingredients, some people have a different palate, like a different personality. But we always have to have the right ingredients, otherwise the dish is not as best as it can be. But you have to understand the ingredients and what they mean. And you also have to recognize this. Some people are born and they've already got the salt, they've already got the pepper, they've already got the herbs, they might also already have things in their pantry. And then other individuals might have to break out a chemistry set and make salt themselves. So it takes a little bit longer sometimes for some individuals. It might be a little bit more difficult, but with the right steps and the right process, you can be successful and you can have happiness. Anyone recognize this gentleman here? Just blurt his name out if you know who he is. The Rock, right? Was The Rock born this way? No, right? He wasn't born this way. No one's born that way. He, like everybody else, was born as a baby, atrophied and undeveloped. And he went through all the same phases, embarrassing pictures, cowboy suits and just like that. But the thing about The Rock is that he had good genetics and a support system that really kind of founded all his behaviors. His grandfather on his mother's side was a world-class wrestler. His father himself was also a world-class wrestler. So within his genes, the people around him said working out was the thing to do. And he put in the work, right? And over time, after he kind of fell out of being able to be a professional football player, he went into wrestling. And here he's more like a boulder than a rock, but he continued to put in the work. He continued to work at his body until he became what I guess you would say is a chiseled masterpiece nowadays. But who recognizes the movie from this picture? What movie is this from? Central Intelligence, right? Also has an actor that I love, Kevin Hart, as well. If The Rock had a different life, different people in his life, different choices, different outcomes, this could have been him as well, all right? But here's the thing, it doesn't matter. It depends on how you view yourself, right? Your own self-esteem. But I'm also realistic because I realize that there's a lot of influences out there that will influence the way you look at yourself. Because it's determined by other people as well. If everyone around you is putting you down, that's going to start to affect the way that you look at yourself. But in the end, the way you look at yourself matters most. But the next thing to talk about is, many people think that they can just spot someone with mental illness, right? Oh, yeah, you saw that person from the news thing, and I could tell that person had problems. But you cannot judge a book by its covers, because here we have is a natural spectrum of emotions. We want to be on this left side all the time smiling, but at different phases of our life, in different situations, we're going to be like everything else. And you can't tell if any of these people have mental illness. You can't say, oh my God, you're on Instagram posting all these smiling pictures. There's no way you can be depressed. There's no way you can have anxiety. That's not right, because many of us can mask what we are going through, oftentimes until it's too late. And then oftentimes you might get to the point down there where you've just given up, right? But when you're talking about this has more of a reflection of mental health, mental conditioning, than it does mental illness. You can have depression and have less severe depression and live a very happy life, actually. But you'll struggle occasionally, especially when you have some ups and downs in life. But you have to separate the two, okay? When someone's struggling in life and not doing the right things, not having the right ingredients, they might spend more time in the right pictures, on the right side, right? But you cannot judge a book by its cover. You recognize these folks? Who is it? Who are they? Anthony Bourdain. Yes, who's the woman? Kate Spade. The last class I had here was the upper class, and over the summer I gave a talk with NAMI, which is a mental health organization. That very day was the day that right after the talk I learned about Kate Spade completing suicide. Right? So it shows that you cannot judge a book by its cover, because they were extremely successful, gurus in their industry, and yet something was missing in their life that caused them to lead towards despair. But that doesn't mean that you have mental illness as a problem. There's many examples of individuals who are highly successful and lived with mental illness, say for JFK, who's long past now, but they live. And you might see some individuals here who've been on the news recently for some ups and downs. Like I said, it's going to be chronic a lot of the times. And whenever you're going through ups and downs, you're going to have some issues. So as we don't have chaos, because I know you guys would have blurred out their names, we're going to start at the left and go over, left and over, left and over. Who do we have up at the top left? Demi Lovato. Who's this gentleman here? Brandon Marshall is a football player. Do you guys even know who Brandon Marshall is? Good. I know they're small pictures. What about this woman? Adele, singer. Who's this? Ruby Rose, Orange is the New Black. John F. Kennedy, leader of the free world, president of the United States formerly. Who's this? Channing Tatum. Anyone know who she is? No one ever knows. Anybody? Margaret Cho. Does anyone know who that is? It's a comedian. She's a comedian. Serena Williams, a world-class tennis player. Adam Levine. Halle Berry. I don't know his name. Can anyone tell me? Unfortunately, I need to remember his name. He's a basketball player. Lady Gaga, yes. Who's this gentleman? Ron Artest, that's correct. Will Smith, Alicia Keys, Leonardo DiCaprio, yes. Kerry Washington, and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, a man who I was just talking about earlier, right? Now, I know you're probably wondering, what illness do they have? Well, I'm going to show you. Many people nowadays deal with depression, including Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Did anyone know that? Did anyone know that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson has lived with depression for decades now? Raise your hands if you knew that. Yeah. He recently came out talking about that, about in April, where he started becoming more vocal about it, and he's becoming much more active on social media in this regard. Now, his story with this that I just read this morning to kind of give you the right information was that many of his problems started at the age of 15. If you remember that picture I showed you where he was a lot skinnier, that was about the age it started. And he said that what happened is mom had always suffered with depression and had a few suicide attempts in her lifetime. And at that time, they were driving on the interstate, and she jumped out of the car and was walking in incoming traffic, and he had to jump out and pull her out to save her. And from then on, he said, is when a lot of his issues started, and he's had many ups and downs throughout life. But what do you think that he did to cope with his problems? Can anyone tell me what they think he did? He worked out. That's right. He worked out. He said that, I don't want to sit at home wallowing away from people. I want to get out there. And he didn't just work out by himself, right? He went to the gym. He built relationships with people. He developed a support network. Over time, he turned a weakness into a strength. And as you can see, based on the gigantic chiseled figure he is today, he probably really did have a lot of issues with depression because he put in all that work. And that's one of the tests of the ingredients, is the activities that you do as a part of the recipe. Okay? But he lives with the condition. Now, other individuals on here include Adele, JFK, and the NBA basketball player's name I actually don't remember, who have, what's that? What's his name? Paul George? Okay, thank you. But they have anxiety disorder. Does it surprise you? The President of the United States had anxiety disorder, would have panic attacks on occasion. The top of the United States. Adele, who's a singer, sings in front of millions of people, also has anxiety disorder. Now the next step of people here is Channing Tatum, Adam Levine, and Will Smith, who have ADHD. Does anyone know what that means? Go ahead.
Attention deficit hyperactive.
Yep, correct. So they have issues with concentration and unable to stay still and control their energy, right? That is a form of a mental illness because it affects the brain function, all right? Now, Demi Lovato and Brandon Marshall have bipolar disorder. They go through extremes of very good highs and very big lows. And the last two little outliers there is Leonardo DiCaprio, who's got obsessive compulsive disorder, and Kerry Washington has eating disorder. But again, you can't judge a book by its cover, because when you look at someone like The Rock, you would have never thought that he had problems with depression and emotions. But he wants people to realize that emotions make us who we are. They're a part of our humanity. And you can live with mental illness and be very successful and very happy. So a couple of quotes I want you guys to remember for today's talk is, number one, this philosopher by the name of Wayne Dyer. He had a quote that said, "Wherever you are, at whatever age, you're only a thought away from changing your life." And what that means to me when I think about that is, again, your choices, the things that you do in life, the ways that you look at things, is a summation of all the things you know and believe. So if there's a belief that you have that's potentially holding you back, and you simply flip that, even just to a mild degree, it completely changes the direction of your life if it becomes a part of who you are. So we're all a single thought away from really changing our lives. And one of my all-time favorite actors, who unfortunately completed suicide himself years ago, had at one time said in one of my favorite movies, Dead Poets Society, this is Robin Williams, by the way, "No matter what people tell you, words and ideas can change the world." And why is it important to talk about these things, guys? Because by the statistics, which are only this way because of the culture we're in and the way that we manage people and the treatment societies that we have, is that 1 out of 5 individuals, which is 20% of the population, including adolescents, have a diagnosable mental health condition. But a big problem is that only 50% will ever receive the help that they need. Not necessarily because the help's not there, because there's shame involved. People don't want to speak out about their problems. And one of the statistics says that the majority of people wait 8 to 10 years to get help. That's a long time to wait. Think about all the damage to everything that they need in life that occurs over that time. And 50% of mental illnesses begin before the age of 14. So this is not just an adult issue, right? Many times people believe those social factors and biological factors, the exposures you have, start at day one, but for many people start around the age of 5 or so. When 5-year-olds start to be a little bit more attuned to each other's emotions and stuff like that, that's when problems can start. So the two things I wanted to talk about mainly today, and the 10 minutes I have left, is the process and the ingredients. Now the process I talked to you about with change is the My Hope for Change model, and My Hope is an acronym, okay? And the 6 boxes I mentioned here are the ingredients that we're talking about. And if you read these ingredients out, you might say, "Dr. Tran, those make sense. Those are common sense things, aren't they?" Well, one of the quotes I always tell people that I made myself is to say this: common sense is only common if it's always in your awareness and affects your behavior. Otherwise, it's just things that you know. And I want this to be simple. I made it to be simple because it's that important to address those areas. So let's talk about the process real quick. Has anyone heard of mindfulness recently? Mindfulness, does anyone know what it means or what it stands for? Anybody? Anybody? What's mindfulness?
Being present in the moment and being aware of yourself and your environment.
Yeah, being present in the moment, being aware. That kind of goes to activities like meditation, yoga, right? People talk about those things a lot. When I think about mindfulness, I actually kind of go a little bit deeper to think about it in 2 different perspectives. An active mindfulness and a passive mindfulness, because to me, mindfulness is about what the brain does, what it should do. And passive mindfulness is what she's kind of talking about there. And active mindfulness is what I talk about in the process of My Hope. And in this situation, you first have to ask yourself this: is your mind full, or are you being mindful? Because so many times nowadays we are so distracted by all the things we have to do that it just eats time away in our day. Would you agree? We have thousands and thousands of things going on. We do not take the time to just clear our minds. And when you're thinking about these boxes to fill, realize you only have 24 hours a day to address them. And some of them are much more important from the standpoint of how much time they take, okay? So if you're distracted by things that don't necessarily fill your boxes, that's going to cause problems over time, okay? So the mindfulness, the active mindfulness there really addresses those two choices I said you have. When you think about being present in the moment, not judging yourself, thinking about being aware of the issues you have and accepting the problem that you have or the thing you want to address, and then thinking about the barriers and how you can address them. And then once you have that, you move into that third choice, which is to seek the right help, right? And if you recognize here, if you recognize that first box that I talked about, the support system, everyone is doing stuff together. And they're getting the right help depending on what problem they have. Which moves you into the next one, which is the O, organization. Doing things together, because human nature is meant for us to interact with one another. But nowadays, we oftentimes will isolate ourselves from other people just because of the bad interactions we tend to have. It makes us fearful. And that's a big problem. We were so much more effective together. There's an African proverb that says this: if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Okay? And the next part is the P of my hope, which is purpose. Thinking about the reasons why you want to get what you want to do. Why do you want to quit smoking? Why do you want to lose weight? Why do you want to get to this college to pursue that career? Think about your purpose and motivation. But at the same time, think about all the things in your life that are important to you that prevent you from falling back. Because you're going to hit hard times. And if you can't think about the reasons to keep going, you're going to fall back to square one. I always talk about the situations of road rage. None of you guys are drivers nowadays, but you might be in situations with your parents sometimes where someone cuts them off and they're screaming. And then I think about that situation, like someone cuts me off, I'm like, oh my God, do I ram my car into them? No, I'm going to sit there and think, oh, I got my kids in the car, I've got a job I don't want to lose, I've got all this, and that, I'm going through all these things, and then I don't do it. But when it comes to a vice, oftentimes people don't have reasons why. And when they don't have those barriers, they fall back to what it is that they want to go to. They're not going to be able to stop themselves sometimes. It doesn't guarantee success, but it makes it more likely to be able to control things. Okay? And the last of which is education. Knowledge is power, right, guys? We talk about that all the time. But I'll tell you the reason why knowledge is power. Because life is about failures. It's about the perseverance. Failure is not an option is a big issue, isn't it? Because your life is not a test about taking tests, okay? We have failures in life and then we're supposed to learn from them. But the power of education is this, is that when you get a book about a topic that you're interested in, or you're watching a video or doing an audiobook, you're literally downloading decades of knowledge that someone has developed over time. And if you're lucky, they spent time reading and doing stuff, knowledge from other people as well. So you're getting all that information compressed so you don't have to make those mistakes within a couple of hours or days. And then you evolve and update it yourself. That is the power of education. So the purpose of today is to try to inspire you to think that if you're listening to me today and something hits a chord in you, I'm hoping you take that stuff home and evaluate these things for yourself and evaluate where you stand and how you can grow. Okay? So this can apply to anything, guys. Does anyone know this activity? Hacky sack, right? If you want to be the hacky sack champion of the world, you can go out there and just do it yourself, by yourself, not looking at anything. Or you can realize that there's a book for everything, right? There's videos, there's YouTube videos, there's probably an app for that. There's an app for everything. And you're going to work with other people. You might get some mentors and competitions and stuff like that. But there's a process you have to go through to grow in everything. And now to touch on the 6 boxes here, first of all, we're going to talk about the 5 minutes left, the support system. I kind of have these things in the organization of what I kind of feel is the most important. And when I talk about support system, it's not just the people in your life. I actually include your environment in here. All right? Because when you're talking about a community like Episcopal, rather than individual people you have in your life, you also have that culture, that attitude of the school that will also mold the way that you look at things as well. Okay? But when I talk about the support system, and all this stuff is in the handout you guys have, is how do you evaluate the people in your lives and whether or not they're a healthy unit of support? I tell people they have to meet 3 criteria. Be fully supportive, non-judgmental, and emotionally calm if not happy at all times. Right? Because think about a situation that you've had before where you had a problem and you wanted to talk to somebody about it. And it probably ended up being a bad interaction. They probably didn't mean to be, but they probably came off to you unsupportive, judgmental. They might have been screaming at you because you were screaming at them, right? Has anyone ever been through that situation or seen it before? Right? This is really what helps. This helps to validate people's feelings. And when we're talking about this, recognize that when you want to help somebody, it's not just about your intention. How it's perceived by that person is so much more important. We can tell typically where our emotions lie, but we cannot tell without asking whether or not what we said was helpful or judgmental, right? So you have to take that into account. And if someone tells you, you know what, that didn't help me, don't get mad, because that's not the purpose. You're still trying to help that person. You can rephrase. You tell them, I didn't mean that, I'm sorry. I'm going to try to say it in a different way so I can help you, all right? That's how you evaluate healthy support. And then you recognize this, that people exist along a spectrum of individuals. Everything is along the spectrum. And there's oftentimes extremes, and most of us live in the middle. And when we're talking about your support system, recognize on one extreme, you have individuals who've always been healthy. They've always had everything that they needed in life. They don't understand what it's like to be without it. And they can sometimes be judgmental towards others and not understand why anyone would be 500 pounds, why anyone would smoke 2 packs a day. They just don't understand it. And they can be judgmental. That's unhelpful to many people, especially if they're trying to get help from you. On the other side are really toxic individuals who are unhealthy but in denial of it. They're not accepting that they have a problem, or they're not accepting some of the things that are contributing to that problem. Those ones will drag you down if you're trying to make improvement in your life. Where most of us are is that we have something. We all know that we have issues we have to deal with and we want to get better, but we can do things together. You band with people who live in the middle. The Rock was probably in the middle, and as he went on, he moved more towards that healthy side. But since he was not always healthy, he didn't have that judgment because he's been there before. Now we're talking about stress relief. Recognize that anything that you do that makes you feel better is a stress relief mechanism, okay? But we talk about negative stress relief coping mechanisms. Those are things that make you feel better but cause damage over time. Things like smoking, drinking, eating processed synthetic foods that we have nowadays. It might include even doing things like this, social media, waking up at 2 a.m. in the morning to check your Twitter and Instagram feed, watching Netflix for 42 hours straight, or playing video games by yourself for 14 hours a night, right? Or you can be a real champ and you do multiple things at one time. But the positive sides of things, when you look at these activities, it might make sense, but they're also, one thing's key is that they're doing things together. Because when I mention those things, I don't want you to think that I'm against video games or anything like that. I love video games. I don't think they cause major problems. It's not that's the issue. But here, they're playing together. They're watching together as a family. And they're eating together. They're having a drink together as well. They're working on that support system while they're doing some of these other things as well. Okay, that's the caveat that matters. Now, mindfulness here is that passive mindfulness. And I mentioned to people meditation, because meditation includes deep breathing. We're not a very active society nowadays as we sit in our cubicles and things like that. We're not running out in nature like we used to, or farming. So we don't take deep breaths like we used to. And there's a lot of science behind that and how it affects your mind. But about 20 minutes a day is what we recommend. And I tell people to separate it. 10 minutes when you wake up and 10 minutes before bed. Maybe do it before you do a test as well. Sleep is an extremely important issue because it takes about 1/3 of your day. And so many people struggle. In your age group, you're supposed to be sleeping about 8 to 10 hours a night. How many of you guys achieve that? 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night. Well, you're lucky. Right. I've been sleep deprived since I was in medical school. Thousands of hours of sleep a day. But that's a huge issue for many people nowadays because it's not just about quality, but quality. A lot of people have issues with sleep apnea, where they wear a mask or they have restless leg. They don't get good sleep. So activity and nutrition are the last two things. Activity is about balance. With activity, there's a certain limit. When I talk about activity, it's not just about exercise, it's about using your brain. If you're not doing well with your mental health, doing too much is a problem too. And when we talk about nutrition, it's about what you put in your body, right? We actually now know, this talks about obesity, how it's a big epidemic nowadays, and how people don't have control because look what they're looking at outside, right? How can they possibly control themselves if that's all they see? But then also, there's a direct link. The foods we eat will directly affect your mental health. This is a growing field of science that we're looking at. If you can attain these things in a balanced manner, you can have success in life. Thank you very much, guys.